So are we all set to start? Okay. So, can everyone on the Zoom hear me?
Yes.
Yes,
we
great.
can.
Okay. So good afternoon. Welcome. Thank you for joining us today. I am grateful to be sharing this room with so many people who are committed to our pro-human movement. It's 3 months ago that we really kicked this off, and we have over 25,000 people who have signed up with FAIR. We have, I don't know the exact number, Lori could tell us. We have a large number of chapters that have already formed and many more that are in the process of being formed. And I am really excited to be sharing today the FAIR learning standards, the pro-human learning standards, and give a preview of the FAIR curriculum. Today we're going to talk about Loving Day, and we're also going to talk about the pro-human learning standards and curriculum. In 1947, an 18-year-old student wrote an essay in the Morehouse College newspaper titled "The Purpose of Education." "We must remember that intelligence is not enough," wrote the young future Dr. Martin Luther King. "Intelligence plus character, that is the goal of true education." His essay ended with a warning that applies today just as much as it did 74 years ago. If we are not careful, our colleges will produce a group of closed-minded, unscientific, illogical propagandists consumed with immoral acts. Be careful, brethren. Be careful, teachers. Last fall, I pulled my kids from Riverdale Country School, the only grade school they had known. My skin is brown because of the genes I inherited from my father, who is Mexican and Yaqui, which is an indigenous tribe native to the US-Mexico border region. My children have lighter skin, as does my wife, who was 6 years old when she immigrated to North America as a refugee from the former Soviet Union. What I have learned, what I know to be true, is that every person has their own unique story. There is danger in trying to flatten those stories, those lived experiences, into stereotypes, into crude misrepresentations of the significance of something so insignificant as the amount of melanin in a person's skin. Martin Luther King Jr. has always been a hero to me. My kids' school insisted that what I knew to be true was wrong. The school demanded that my family embrace a new intolerant orthodoxy, a backward belief system that presents a flawed academic theory as fact, and seeks to force our children into group identity buckets that reduce them to labels and stereotypes. I'm not an activist. I'm not partisan or political. I spent the first year of my life on a commune in Berkeley, California. The commune's still around. My mom went to a reunion a few years ago. My mother raised me with values. Growing up, I learned to elevate gratitude over grievance, optimism over pessimism, forgiveness over resentment, understanding over ignorance, and honest diversity over conformity. In 1967, 20 years after the young Dr. King wrote his essay, and 13 years after Brown versus Board of Education ended legal segregation in schools, the Supreme Court ruled in Loving v. Virginia that laws prohibiting marriage between people of diverse ancestry and skin colors were unconstitutional. At the time, such so-called anti-miscegenation laws were on the books in 16 southern states. In many ways, June 12, 1967 marks the end of legal segregation in our country. Over the next 50 years, we made huge strides. But something has gone wrong. This year, in 2021, University of Pennsylvania Professor Emeritus Adolph Reed, a founding member of the U.S. Labor Party, a frequent contributor to The Progressive, The Nation, The New Republic, and other progressive publications, said that anti-racism is doing for the ruling class of our country what racism did 100 years ago. The reason he said this is because what schools like Riverdale are doing to our children in the name of anti-racism is in fact teaching them racism. As Daryl Davis has said, it's not enough for us to be anti-racist. We also need to be pro-human. It's not enough to say what we are against. We also have to say what we are for. FAIR is for a world where every child is given the opportunity to succeed, to thrive. FAIR is for education that teaches positive character strengths and open-minded inquiry, as the young king advocated so many years ago. FAIR is for a culture where we have civil discourse and where we elevate universal values like fairness and understanding and embrace our common humanity. My mom raised me to believe that I was capable of anything, that I was not limited by the circumstances of my birth. To see myself and to see other people for who they are, not what they look like. It's our right as parents, it's our responsibility as parents to raise our children to be good people, to have character strengths that will help them and help our society to thrive. I have met such amazing, resilient, courageous people over the past 6 months. People like Takirika and Martin, like Paul and Dana. People who spoke the truth and stood up to help end the spiral of silence and polarization. Nelson Mandela, a man who spent decades in prison and truly suffered for the cause of ending the injustice of apartheid in South Africa, once said, "Having resentment against someone is like drinking poison and thinking it will kill your enemy." We need to remind our schools that the purpose of education is to open minds, not close them. We need to remind our schools that the purpose of education is to strengthen the bonds that unite us, not weaken them. FAIR is here to support an honest and constructive approach to ethnic studies and educating our children about race, racism, and historical injustice. Our pro-human learning standards and curriculum elevate civil discourse and positive character strengths and are rooted in dignity and our common humanity. We have a lot planned over the next hour. First, Daryl Davis is going to speak about what it means to be pro-human. We're going to hear from Takirika and Martin about Loving Day. We're also going to hear from Eli Steele about Loving Day. And we're also going to hear from Letitia, Ian Rowe, who is, come on up, Ian. Ian Rowe and Adam Seagrave and others about the new FAIR pro-human learning standards and curriculum. So our first speaker is Daryl Davis. Daryl is on, yes? There we go, I see Daryl. And Daryl is an R&B and blues musician. He's an author, actor, and band leader. He is also on the FAIR Board of Advisors. And Daryl's efforts to fight racism are really what inspired our pro-human approach. And actually it was Daryl who, when I spoke with him, I think it was back in January, and I spoke with him about anti-racism, and I said, you know, how is it that there are people who are saying that they're anti-racist, but they're really racist? How is that? And Daryl said, I really prefer to talk about what we're for, and that inspired pro-human as our whole movement. Daryl connects with people. His approach is to connect with people, and he always emphasizes dignity and our common humanity. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Daryl.
Thank you, Brian. Really appreciate it. And welcome, everyone. It's a real pleasure to be here amongst all of you and my esteemed colleagues here on this panel today. So welcome to this webinar. Well, I'll give you a little bit of background on myself first. I'm 63 years of age, and as a child, I was a child of parents in the U.S. Foreign Service. So I spent a lot of time overseas, starting at the age of 3, going to various countries, living there for 2 years, and then returning back home here to the States for a short time, and then back to another country overseas for 2 years. So my formative years were spent back and forth between this country. Now today, as an adult musician, I once again travel around the world. When you combine my childhood travels with my adulthood travels, I've been now in a total of 57 countries on 6 continents. And I've played in 49 of our 50 states. All that is to say that I have been exposed to a multitude of ethnicities, skin colors, cultures, religions, ideologies, etc. And all of that has helped shape who I've become. And I can tell you something for certain. No matter how far I go from my own country right here in the US, whether it's right next door to Canada, or to Mexico, or halfway around the globe, no matter how different the people I encounter may look from me, or not speak my language, or not worship as I do, when I come home, I always conclude one thing, and that is, we all are human beings. And as such, we all want the same 5 core values in our lives. We all want to be loved. We all want to be respected. We all want to be heard. We all want to be treated fairly. And we all want the same things for our family as anybody else wants for their family. And I will guarantee you, if you employ some of those 5 values in any society or culture in which you may find yourself unfamiliar, I will guarantee your navigation will be a lot more smooth and a lot more positive. I have been employing these core values in my meetings with white supremacists for almost 40 years now. I've attended KKK rallies, neo-Nazi gatherings, all kinds of stuff. I've faced danger, I've faced friendship, I've faced curiosity. But as a result of that, over 200 white supremacists have renounced that ideology. Many have given me their robes and hoods and their swastika flags and all kinds of other stuff, which I'm going to put in a museum. But it comes from conversation and dialogue, getting to know one another. We may start out this far apart as a black man and a Klansman, but if you spend 5 minutes with your worst enemy, you will find something in common, and the gap narrows. You spend a little more time, you find more things in common. And now you're in a relationship, and you keep on talking. Now you're heading towards a friendship. And when you get here, the trivial things that you have in contrast begin to matter less and less, such as skin color, or whether you go to a church, a mosque, a synagogue, or a temple. And that's what it's all about. It bothers me a great deal as an American that we call ourselves the greatest nation on the face of this earth. Now don't get me wrong, I am a patriot, I love my country, but that statement just doesn't ring right with me just yet. Perhaps we are the greatest nation on the face of this earth when it comes to technology. We have put a man on the moon. We invented that technology. And while Neil Armstrong was up there walking around talking about one small step for man and one giant leap for mankind, we were able to communicate with them live via satellite radio phone, all the way from Earth to the moon. We invented that technology. Everybody on this webinar today, whether you're virtual or there in person in New York, each and every one of you has email. Each and every one of you has a cell phone. You type a few words, type a few numbers, hit send, and you're talking to people right next door, halfway across the country or around the world, anywhere on the face of this earth. So how is it that we as Americans can talk to people as far away as the moon or anywhere on the face of this planet, but yet so many of us can't even talk to the person who lives right next door because he or she is a different color, a different ethnicity, a different persuasion, a different whatever. It seems to me that before we can call ourselves the greatest nation on the face of this earth, our ideology needs to catch up to our technology. And once it gets up there, then we can truly brag about how great we are. Folks, this is the 21st century. We are living in space-age times. So why are there still so many of us thinking with Stone Age minds? You know, I truly believe that a missed opportunity for dialogue is a missed opportunity for conflict resolution. It costs you nothing to sit down with someone who may not look like you, who may not worship as you do, or vote for the same candidate as you do, and have a conversation. I call it walking across the cafeteria. Granted, we couldn't walk across cafeterias too much this past year during the pandemic, but certainly now as things are beginning to open up, or even virtually, you know, reach out to people who may not share your opinion, who may not share your belief or your whatever. Reach out to them, have a conversation with them. You know, I see people in metropolitan cities all the time. They may work together at the same company. They might even be in the same cubicle. But what happens at 12 noon? They go downstairs to the cafeteria, and then they self-segregate. Blacks sit with blacks, Hispanics sit with Hispanics, and so forth. That's fine, okay? Does that mean that they're racist? No. People generally tend to feel more comfortable around somebody that has familiar beliefs or language, etc. That's fine, okay? The problem is when you tell somebody, no, you can't sit at my table. But leave your comfort zone and walk across the cafeteria once or twice a month and sit with someone you would not ordinarily sit with, because you have a lot to teach them and you have a lot to learn from them, and you will make a new friend. And if I can go to Klan rallies and neo-Nazi rallies and come out with robes and hoods and swastika flags and all kinds of stuff, certainly you can sit down at your own dinner table and talk and have a conversation with your family members who may have voted for somebody different than you voted for. I have seen too many families and friendships evolve and just into nothing over who voted for who. You know, we need to communicate. This cancel culture must stop. Pro-human is that, you know, race is a man-made construct. We all know that. That's why we're here at FAIR. So we need to be more pro-human. It's good to be anti-racism, the idea of being racist, but let's not be anti the racist. Let's try to educate that racist. Because you know, ignorance breeds fear. We fear those things we don't understand. If we do not check that fear and address it, that fear will escalate into hatred, because we hate the things that frighten us. If we do not address and check that hatred, that will escalate into anger and into destruction. We want to destroy the things that we hate. Why? Because they frighten us. But guess what? They may have been harmless at the end of the day, and we were simply ignorant. For example, you all saw that whole chain unravel to completion almost 4 years ago. Excuse me, I got a bad cold. On August 12th, 2017, in a town about 2 hours from where I'm sitting right now, called Charlottesville, Virginia, when they had a large white supremacist rally there. I personally know the person who put that rally together. I know all the speakers on that rally, personally. And I tell you what, that's some dangerous stuff. On August 12th, 2017, there was a lot of ignorance in Charlottesville, Virginia. There was a lot of fear in Charlottesville, Virginia. It escalated into a lot of hatred in Charlottesville, Virginia. And what did it culminate in? It culminated in destruction. When a white supremacist got inside his vehicle and tried to murder as many people as he could by driving full force into the crowd of counter-protesters. He succeeded in injuring 20 people and murdering one young lady named Heather Heyer. Ignorance breeds fear, fear breeds hatred, hatred breeds destruction. Now, we spend a lot of time going about addressing this the wrong way. Don't start at the top in this case. You know, if we're dealing with departments and companies and corporations, yes, you want to tighten up things at the top because whatever is at the top trickles down. If management is tight, the people down on the floor will be tight. If management in the corporation or police department is sloppy, the people down on the ground, on the beat, are going to be sloppy. They're going to be loose. So you tighten upstairs. But when you're dealing with this kind of thing, you got to start at the bottom. Forget about the destruction. What's destroyed is not coming back. Forget about the hate. Forget about the fear. Those are all symptoms. Those are all byproducts of the nucleus. The nucleus is ignorance. If you cure the ignorance, then there's nothing to fear, because we fear that of which we're ignorant. With nothing to fear, there is nothing to hate. With nothing to hate, there's nothing to get angry about and destroy. So the good thing is this: there is a cure for ignorance, and that cure is called education. And that is precisely what FAIR provides with this pro-human approach. You know, people have not wanted to talk about anti-Semitism and racism and all kinds of other discriminations for years. We just keep it swept under the carpet, lock it in the closet, don't talk about it, turn a blind eye. If we don't see it, it doesn't exist. That has been our attitude for too long. And now it's in our face, and people are not quite sure how to address it, but they know they have to address it. And even people with the best intentions sometimes address it the wrong way. And again, that's where FAIR comes in. We have been studying this. People on this panel have lived it. They know the answers, and together we've put together some learning standards that we want to implement in all the schools, in the entire educational system in this country, to teach teachers how to address it. Because oftentimes they don't address it. And when they do, sometimes they get it right, sometimes they get it wrong. That's why there's such a controversy today, because we've not taken the time to sit down and work this out. So I encourage you, come together. And you notice, real quick, if we look at the beginning of the civil rights movement, let's pinpoint it, let's just say 1955 with Rosa Parks and the bus boycott, and on through 1968 with Dr. Martin Luther King. When we look at those marches and protests and demonstrations and boycotts and sit-ins, we see a large ocean of Black people with a few white people mixed in. There have always been some white people who had the vision, who saw what we were going through and wanted to support us and came out and did support us. And the pages of progress turned very slowly. Today, fast forward to last year, 2020, in the wake of the George Floyd lynching, you look at those protests. What did the people see? They saw an ocean of black people, an ocean of white people marching together for the common cause. And as a result, the pages of progress turned much faster. In the past, if a police officer were to be charged, it would take months and months and months. And then chances are he or she would never be convicted. Today, they're being charged like that and convicted. But while a lot of these marches were geared towards police, there was an even larger ripple effect that happened in our country as a result of that collective voice. NASCAR banning the Confederate battle flag. NASCAR was ground zero for the Confederate battle flag. The sovereign state of Mississippi removing the Confederate portion out of their flag. Who ever would have thought Mississippi would have done that? Food brands changing their labels, like Aunt Jemima and Uncle Ben. Legislation being passed to change the names of buildings owned by, named after slave owners, or Confederate statues coming down. All of this is a result of the collective voice, and that's what we need to focus on. Let's focus on our humanity. Let's be pro-human. And I hope you all will tell all of your friends and colleagues about this great organization, and stick around. We got a lot more fantastic speakers today. Wishing you all the very best this weekend. Thank you. Thank you, Brian.
Thank you, Daryl. Daryl has to go. I don't know how you're going to keep speaking though, Daryl, but I know you're going to another event.
I gotta sing tonight.
Yes.
Take care, y'all.
Save your voice. Thank you, Daryl. So up next we have Eli Steele, who is an award-winning documentary filmmaker. He is also on the FAIR Board of Advisors, and I have met Eli. It's funny when you're building an organization in the time of COVID, you don't actually get to meet many people in person. Where this is a very special day because I'm seeing a lot of people who I've Zoomed with that I haven't met in person. Eli I actually got to meet in person not too long ago, and Eli's going to share a few words with us today.
Hi, it's an honor to be here, and I thank Daryl for his words, they're invaluable. And I'm very honored to be a member of FAIR. It's kind of sad that we need FAIR, but if we need it, it's the best, I think one of the best organizations to have. And I believe we are on the verge of making real change in the country. Today, is Loving Day, and I never heard of Loving Day until probably in my early 30s, which is kind of strange because I kind of lived the life my family is so abroad. So I wrote a couple of notes so you see me looking over there, that's why. But one thing I kind of want to start with is that what most interracial families come to learn is that love is not race, it's the most important ingredient. This is not a kumbaya sentimental or anything like that. It's a reality because it is love that overcomes racism. It is love that keeps the families together. And it is love that is the universal truth. Whereas race is man-made, it's a few people in power decide how the rest of us are going to rule for the rest of us. So, and lastly, it is love, not race, that uplifts us all. And I know this is true because I am the product of two interracial marriages. And we don't, I want to say in my family, we don't view them as interracial marriage. This is marriage. This is two individuals who happen to cross the color line, fall in love, create a family, and so forth. And this line was a line created by white supremacy. So that's something that we can never kind of forget. That, and we should always ask ourselves, why are we following the color line, this line was created by a few white people? back in the day. But thankfully, my ancestors did not obey that line. In the early 1940s, my grandmother, who is from Ohio, a daughter of the American Revolution, moved to Chicago, and she was one of the first members of CORE, which is Congress of Racial Equality. And there she met my grandfather, who is from Camp Nelson, Kentucky. He was born to parents that had been born in slavery. These generations in my family are far, far apart. And they had every reason not to marry. I mean, they got married in 1942. They had every reason not to do it, but they fell in love. And the family shared with them. My grandmother became Black the moment that she married my grandfather. And that was because she moved across the color line to the segregated part of the Black side of segregated Chicago. All her friends were Black. Everybody that she knew was Black in the world. And so my grandfather's family embraced her, but her family did not. And it took her parents 6 years to realize that they had chosen the racial order of their time over the love of their daughter. And when they came to that realization, they reunited with my grandparents and my great-grandfather, who was a carpenter. He built one of the first A&W boot stand in Ohio. He bonded with my grandfather over the love of carpentry, and they became best friends. My grandmother never saw her four sisters again. Those women had chosen race over love and family. And then fast forward in 1966, my mother, who is the daughter of Holocaust survivors, left New York for Iowa, which is kind of a culture shock, if you can imagine that. And she, like many Americans at that time, was angry in how people would be treated in certain parts of the country. So she joined the civil rights organization at her college, and my father was the president of that. They fell in love, and this is despite my father Getty's green-head wallet on the first day. So they fell in love, and people 11, they married on January 1st, 1967. So this is before Loving versus Regina, just a couple of months before. And they had no idea what kind of America they were going to end up with. This was 1967, there were riots all over. My parents faced discrimination on a personal level, housing discrimination. My father was handcuffed, was riding around in the car with my mother. So they had no idea what kind of America they were marrying to, but they were in love, and that's all that mattered. And it took my grandfather, my Jewish grandfather, disowned my mother. He was a Holocaust survivor, and he thought that it was responsibility to bring back the Jewish people out of the Holocaust. And so it took her. It took him a long time to overcome this tribalism and realize that it was not worth the price he had to pay. He loved his daughter, and so he, like a man, came out to California, shook my father's hand, and became one of my father's closest friends, and became a major influence on my father's writings, because Jews and Black have so much in common in terms of history, in terms of overcoming oppression, stuff like that. So they became, really good friends. Today, my two kids, my daughter June is 11, my son Jack is about to turn 13. They are the product of all of it, plus the mother's side, which is from Mexico. In a way, they are living Martin Luther King dream. And I say this factually. They have friends in all four corners of the world. And when my kids grow up and they fall in love, it's going to be with somebody from a different race because, very few people have the same background as them. But sadly, in a couple of years, in today's America, my kid will be forced with feel the pressures to conform to the racial ideologies of today, which is why Bear is existing today. They will be asked, what does skin color mean? They will be told they are what society sees them as. And that's why I tell my kids the stories of how my grandparents and how my parents met and married. And I ask them one question. What if my parents and my grandparents had listened to the racial orders of their time? And after one of these conversations, my daughter said, if they had listened, then I would not be here. My brother and you, me, we would not be here. So there is a price paid for choosing race over love. And while there's always a price for the come to love, the rewards are far, far greater. Thank you for having me here.
Thank you, Eli. So now we're going to play a video that Jake Klein, who is the director of media production for FAIR, put together with Takirka and Martin. And then we're going to hear a few words from Takirka and Martin as well. But this is part of the celebration of Loving Day. I think it's a beautiful video. I think you'll enjoy it.
My name is Martin Kakaska.
My name is Takirka Kakaska, and we're both teachers.
And we both live in Oak Park, Illinois.
Yes, we both live here because we're married.
The Loving versus Virginia case.
There was a couple, a white man and a mixed race woman.
Back in 1958, they fell in love and they wanted to get married. And in the state of Virginia and many other southern states, they could not get married because of the laws on the books that whites and blacks could not marry.
So they got married. They ended up getting arrested for being married, which was crazy.
Mildred, she wrote a letter to Robert F. Kennedy, and he sent it to the ACLU, where it first went into the local courts, the state court, it went all the way up to the Supreme Court. They won their case, and on June 12, 1967, it's known as Loving Day, and the state of Virginia, along with 16 southern states, whites and blacks could now marry.
They were basically arguing that a person is a person, and it doesn't matter if they're black or if they're white. You are equal under the law, no matter what color you are. When we were going to get married, I didn't have to worry, oh my God, is this gonna be illegal?
And I just think about the sacrifice that the Lovings made in order for Takirka and I to love each other in any state. We've been married 9 years now, and it's really been the best 9 years of my life.
We called each other twin.
Yeah.
Yeah, we had so much in common. It's been so beautiful, so wonderful having the kids. I want another baby so bad. We cannot afford it, but I want another baby. I wish we could do it one more time.
Yeah.
But I do worry about them like growing up in today's world where we hyper-focus on race so much. At the kids' school, they are trying to introduce this curriculum, this anti-racism curriculum.
All the parents that have children in our school district, they met with a lead diversity trainer, and she gave a 2-hour talk on whiteness. And
yeah, she said whiteness about 30 times at least.
Yeah.
Yes. And how we need to neutralize whiteness. I think by hyper-focusing on the way that people look, it starts to make kids notice things that really aren't as important, like your skin color. This idea that whiteness is evil is really disappointing, because, you know, if we could think about the Lovings case, they didn't see each other, or didn't see one of them as evil. They saw each other as human beings. And I don't like the talking of evilness as it relates to white people, because I can assure you Mildred did not think her husband was evil.
Yes.
And their kids did not think that their dad was evil and upholding a legacy of whiteness and in a negative way. Like the Lovings, they fought to be seen as equals.
Yes.
They fought to be seen as human beings. And here we are taking all this hard work and just throwing it out of the window. I think we're taking a step backwards by even just the labels of you know, oppressor and oppressed. If we want to move forward in this country and we want to get away from race dominating our culture, we have to stop letting it dominate our culture, and that includes what we're teaching our kids to.
And we don't want to go back. We want to keep progressing as a society. What Loving versus Virginia did for us, let's keep going.
So Lori's going to introduce Takirika and Martin.
Hey everyone, my name is Lori and I am a volunteer coordinator with FAIR. I have had the opportunity to get to know Martin and Takirika, and I want to tell you a little something about them. I want to tell you that they inspire me. They inspire me with their commitment to this idea of our shared humanity. And they inspire me with their relentless positivity. And I know that they inspire you too. And with that, I would like to introduce Martin and Takirika Kokoska.
Lori, thank you so much. I was just listening to Eli Steele, and he was talking about his parents and grandparents, and I'm like, oh my gosh, this is how I love Takirika and how she loves me. And I love her for who she is, and it's not based on what color skin she is. And we joined FAIR. Short version story is they started having a diversity, equity, inclusion put out to the staff at my school, and they segregated our staff by skin color. And I was like, oh my gosh, what had just happened? And Megyn Kelly had her podcast 2 weeks later, and Barry Weiss was on there saying, hey, I just started an organization with Byron Barting, and it's called FAIR. She left her email. I emailed her. She reached out. She reached out to my email, and I met Barry and Samantha Harris and Bayan, and Takirika and I just felt this huge relief. Oh my gosh, we're not alone. And I saw FAIR's message, and it's a message of hope and love, that we want understanding, fairness. We're about common humanity, based in Dr. King's message of nonviolence. And we are so blessed to have leaders like Bayan and you, Lori, and so many others. And we're gonna do this with a message of love and hope. And we're not gonna tear down others to uplift others, just as Dr. King preached years ago. And every time we meet new members, and we see that same relief that we had when we met Barry and Bayan. And
we literally see it all
Yeah.
the time. We've been seeing it today. We met so many wonderful people today. So we are so very grateful for FAIR and FAIR's message. I have to say, this is strange times, because the way I grew up, my parents, they didn't focus on race. My mother, who would have been 71 yesterday, the way she treated people was the same. Literally everyone. If you were a CEO or if you were homeless, she saw the humanity in everyone, and that is the way that we grew up. And so now we're living in like kind of strange times where that's not necessarily everyone's approach. And I wish we could spend more time focusing on our shared humanity, because that's what drew Martin and I together. I don't look at us like an interracial couple, because when I met him, I just was drawn to him for all the things we had in common. It wasn't because he was white, and vice versa. And that is really the message, that's the hope and the inspiration that I get from FAIR. We are all human beings, and we have so many more things in common than we don't, like Daryl said. And that is why I am proudly wearing my favorite t-shirts today.
And we want to express gratitude to the Lovings today. That's why we're here. And it's a day of love and hope, that because of the sacrifices they made years ago, that Takirika and I, we can love each other anywhere in the U.S.
And we don't have to worry about being an interracial couple. It doesn't matter. That's not even a thing anymore, because of the Lovings. We don't have to focus on that.
So we thank you, FAIR, for
everything
you do for us.
Thank you, Martin and Takirika, and that was beautiful. I don't know where to look, where the camera is, but that was beautiful, and it's been really such a pleasure getting to know you. And I want to actually cite a statistic, which is that in 1967, 3% of marriages in the U.S. were, I don't like the term interracial personally, because we have one human race, but they were considered interracial. Today it's 17%, so there's been a ton of progress. I'm going to turn it over to Ian Rowe and Letitia, and then if Ian, I know Ian and Letitia are going to have a conversation for about 10 minutes on some of the issues with the current curriculum, which I think has been touched on. I was thinking maybe Melissa could join in on your conversation if that works, because I think she has some thoughts on this as well. But we've got a 10-minute for you, and then we're going to close with Adam Seagrave. So thank you.
Letitia, did you want to start?
Hi, Ian. I'll just introduce myself. Thank you for that, and thank you to everybody for coming. My name is Letitia Kim. I'm an attorney in San Francisco, and I'm the managing director of FAIR's Legal Network. So, Ian, I'll kick it back to you.
Thank you, Letitia, and thank you, everyone. It's such an honor to be here. And the great things about these remarks, it's very personal. So, my wife, Sylvia, and our two kids, Oscar and Camille, are watching right now. And it is really incredible to think that our marriage and our family were made legally possible in 1967. So this is demonstrative of real progress. I'm honored to be here on Loving Day, to be a part of the FAIR Board of Advisors. Partly because, first of all, I had a great public school education in New York City, kindergarten through 12th grade. I went to Brooklyn Tech High School, which you might be able to see, not far from here. Oh, is there another engineer in the room? Excellent, excellent. And I had a great education. I learned about our country. I learned about the negative parts of our history. I learned about the positive parts. I learned about the atrocities. And I learned what was still possible, even in the face of all of the challenges that had occurred in our country. And that's something that's really profound, because it demonstrates what's possible, that you can learn about America, warts and all, and still know what you have the possibility to achieve. And it's a key reason why in my own career, became an educator. You know, for the last 10 years, I ran a network of public charter schools in the heart of the South Bronx and the Lower East Side of Manhattan. You know, 2,000 students, we had 5,000 more on the wait list. Almost all low-income kids, almost all Black and Hispanic. And you know, many of our parents, they went to our schools because they had an aspiration for their kids to live the American dream. You know, they knew that their kids might face racial discrimination, they might face challenges, but they knew that with a great education, great aspirations from teachers, great leadership from principals, anything was possible in this country. And it's why I'm now inspired to launch a new network of character-based international Baccalaureate high schools that I'm launching in the South Bronx next year, because we should have world-class education for every kid in this country. And the grounding principles for this new network are equality of opportunity, individual dignity, and common humanity across race. Because that's what we stand for. That's what we want our kids to believe. And it's really important because we're now at a time where we're seeing curricula that's saying something very different. We're seeing curricula that says, well, actually, there isn't common humanity. That the world is divided into oppressors and oppressed. Or that this country was founded as a slaveocracy and not a democracy. And if you're a kid in the heart of the South Bronx or in rural Appalachia, wherever you are, if you hear these messages over and over and over again, you start to get a very perverse view not only of your country, but also of yourself. Right? You start to believe that you have some inherent advantage because of skin color, or you have some inherent disadvantage because of your skin color, both of which are wrong, right? It is about the human race. And I'm just very inspired to be part of FAIR, and Letitia, I know we want to talk, but there's this great quote from Martin Luther King, which I think is very powerful. And most people haven't heard it, but at the centennial of the Emancipation Proclamation, Martin Luther King gave a speech. And this is what he said in the first paragraph. If our nation had done nothing more in its whole history than to create just 2 documents, its contribution to civilization would be imperishable. The first of these documents is the Declaration of Independence, and the other is that which we are here to honor tonight, the Emancipation Proclamation. All tyrants, past, present, and future, are powerless to bury the truths in these documents, no matter how extensive their legions, how vast their power, and how malignant their evil, end quote. I'm so proud to stand with FAIR for All because we refuse to bury those truths. We are fighting to ensure that every young American, every kid in this country, understands that it's through embracing the ideals of family, faith, hard work, entrepreneurship, enterprise. Those are the vehicles through which we can move from persecution to prosperity. And so I'm really proud to stand with FAIR to make that happen. Melissa, did you want to join in?
Yeah, I'll unmute.
Hey Melissa, did you want to share a few words?
Sure. Welcome everyone. I'm really sad that I'm not in New York. I was supposed to be, but I'm actually stuck in Los Angeles. I'm really excited today to see. I think I was one of the earliest people to see this whole thing blossom from an idea to what it is now in just a few months. All credit to Bayan. It's pretty amazing. So to see like real people, real programs, and content that's being developed, like the curriculum, like the learning standards, as we build more substance into this, and then all the chapters that Lori is working on. And you know, I think it was very emotional to see both Martin and Chakrika, your story and how that relief you described, almost like catharsis, like, all right, I'm not mad. You know, there are other people that are feeling this moment and the urgency to meet it. And so really, I'm really happy to kind of see this, you know, come into fruition. It's almost emotional. And I think Letitia, probably you want to go ahead and talk about the fair lending standards, because this is the meat of FAIR.
Thanks so much, Melissa, and I'm really happy to be here on Loving Day. I too am in a relationship, well, I'm in a marriage. My husband's Korean and I'm Italian, and I never once, and nor did my husband, ever consider ourselves to be in an interracial relationship or marriage. It wasn't until relatively recently that I was thinking that I'm very fortunate, we are very fortunate, as are our children, that my husband and I, you know, we met in college and we dated for a long time before we got married, and we were married in 2005, and I'm just very fortunate that this really wasn't a big thing back then, because I think that maybe if it had been, we wouldn't have gotten married, just because, you know, the climate is trying to pull people apart now based on these immutable characteristics. So I'm just very, very grateful that this has happened after we got married, but I'm very concerned about our children, of course. So I did want to talk briefly about some of the legal issues, because those interrelate in many ways with the curriculum. And of course, litigation is never the first choice, but our laws exist for a reason. They reflect our values as a nation. So we have to consider them, not just as a means of enforcement, but because they are a statement of our values as human beings in this country. So the first legal vehicle is Title VI of the Civil Rights Act, which prohibits public schools from discriminating based on race, including creating a hostile environment based on race. There's the 14th Amendment, which guarantees equal protection under the law vis-a-vis state governments, including schools, because they are an arm of the state government. There's, of course, the First Amendment, guarantees freedom of speech, also vis-a-vis state governments. And then there is an assortment of state civil rights laws that may apply to these situations. So how does what is happening in the schools relate to these laws? Well, together, Title VI and equal protection prohibit public schools from engaging in racial classifications, which includes racial stereotyping. So when we see schools, like Ian talked about, teaching students that all whites are unconscious or conscious oppressors, all black students are victims or oppressed, teaching students that there's such a thing as the white experience or the white perspective, and the black experience and the black perspective, and we have seen all of those things. Those are racial stereotypes and classifications that can be a problem under Title VI and equal protection. Some schools are also shutting down students when they disagree with this narrative, for example, by giving them a failing grade. Some schools have required students to participate in activist marches, which is compelled speech that implicates the First Amendment. And some schools have recently instituted microaggressions policies where they prohibit students from making microaggressive statements and engaging in microaggressive conduct, which is very vaguely defined. That also implicates the First Amendment and some state laws that give students the same First Amendment rights inside the school that those students would have if they were making those statements out in the public square. So, Ian and Melissa, that's just a brief overview of what we are looking at from the legal perspective. If you guys wanted to add to that with respect to the curriculum.
Well, I will just add, Letitia, this is very, very important, because what is happening across the country is that people are now operationalizing some of these aspects of what anti-racist curricula looks like, or professional development. So, Letitia, you mentioned, professional development. Can you imagine if you were a room of teachers and we decided that this half of the room are all whites, you must move over here, and everyone non-white move over here, and literally this section of the room would have to publicly stand up and say, I am an oppressor. Like literally, that is what is happening across the country. But as Letitia says, our country has fought racial discrimination before. right? We already have the tools. We were able to stop segregated water fountains, literally. Though the same laws that ban those kinds of actions are the same ones that we can use now to ban the actions related to much of critical race theory and anti-racist agenda. There are schools that are doing these things called privilege walks. A privilege walk, literally, again, imagine if everyone sat in a horizontal line and we said, if you're white, take 3 steps forward, and if you're black, take 5 steps backward. But just think about what that sends. Consider this the message that sends to a kid. Wow, simply because of my skin color, I'm in this negative position. Again, those are horrific actions, but we already have laws on the books that we can utilize to stop those actions. And as Letitia says, the only front is not legal. It's important to have that framework. What's more important is actually having a curriculum. So rather than just shout in the rain, let's create a compelling alternative, and that is what FAIR has done with the FAIR Learning Standards and the curriculum. And I think Adam is going to speak to that.
Yeah, thanks so much, Ian. Thanks, Brian. I'm so honored to be here celebrating Loving Day with all of you and with my distinguished panelists. Such incredible words and stories, and so I'm just really grateful to be here with all of you today. And yeah, so maybe I'll share a little bit of the backstory, the genesis of the FAIR curriculum as we're developing it. Actually, it started in the fall of 2020, last fall, in October, when Bayan approached me as he was grappling with the way in which his children's school, was teaching about these issues. He approached me about a project that I had co-founded at the University of Missouri with a colleague, Stephanie Shanakan, who was chair of the Department of Black Studies there. And we co-founded a project called Race in the American Story, in which we tried to teach about American history in a complete, balanced way, to tell the whole story, to tell it truthfully, but also optimistically and hopefully, and to bring students together across campus who didn't otherwise talk to each other, who were afraid to talk to each other, who were nervous about crossing those racial lines or lines of other differences, to talk to each other about difficult topics. And we founded this project there in a course, a college course, that introduced students to primary historical sources, that was based on conversation and dialogue. As Daryl said, and that's so important, I think, and so crucial to engage in dialogue and conversation about difficult topics. And that's what we tried to do. And so Bayan saw our website, he reached out to me, and we started talking about how we could translate some of our approach in Race in the American Story to a K-12 level as an alternative to the kinds of education on these issues that students had begun receiving, as Ian was describing. How can we bring that kind of conversational dialogue approach with honesty and optimism about our history going hand in hand? How can we bring that to the K-12 level to educate students not only about their particular identities and stories or their group identities, but more importantly, their human identity and their identity as Americans with a shared American story, others who share in the American story. So how can we educate K-12 students about that, and in that way, using that approach? So our standards, our FAIR pro-human learning standards, are informed by 4 core concepts. Those concepts are humanity, understanding, fairness, and diversity. So how do we understand the diversity of different cultural, ancestral backgrounds that has joined here in the United States? How can we understand that diversity in the light of our common humanity? And how can we understand each other and our different backgrounds and our different unique talents, character strengths, abilities that we bring to the table? How can we do that in our classrooms and how can we have an emphasis on fairness, on treating everyone as equal under the law, making sure that that happens, ensuring progress towards achieving that ideal. So the Fair Learning Standards are informed by those concepts, informed by the same approach that the Race the American Story Project initiated back in 2016. And I want to share with you all a lesson as an example of what our curriculum will look like, sort of as a preview of what's to come later this summer as it's completed. And this lesson is on the Declaration of Independence. So picking up on Ian's comments and the great Martin Luther King Jr. quote about the Declaration of Independence. So I'm going to share my screen here and show you this lesson. Hopefully you all can see it there, those of you who are in person. So the Declaration of Independence and the problem of slavery. So the approach that the FAIR pro-human curriculum will take will be one, as I mentioned, that is both honest about the real injustices and atrocities and failures of Americans in the past and of our American institutions, but one that will also build a foundation of hope for the future and introduce constructive principles that we can really use to move forward and make real progress. So this lesson, there's a PDF available here that can be viewed in its entirety and downloaded. I won't walk you through the entire PDF right now. This is just the first page. The objectives here, you see, are to increase students' understanding of the Declaration of Independence and also its relation to the concurrent problem of slavery. And then secondly, introducing students to alternative interpretations of historical events. So not simply providing a one-sided or biased in any way view of these historical documents and events, but allowing them to think through different opinions on historical events and documents, to appreciate the nuances and complexities that's inherent in trying to understand historical figures and events and documents such as the Declaration of Independence. So both of those objectives are very important. They are key to our FAIR standards, as you can see up there. So our lessons will be structured in that way, informed by our standards. Here's an interactive video, just to give you a taste for the kinds of things that our online components of our curriculum will provide. I'm just going to play this, and there are a number of points along the way where questions are presented to students. So I'll just give you one quick example of that. So as the video is playing, providing information about the historical background of the Declaration of Independence, this question comes up. Did the Declaration of Independence distinguish between people of different ancestries or cultural backgrounds in its statements about equality and liberty? So students can, learners of all types can click on this question, yes or no. The answer, of course, is no, did not distinguish in that way. And then continue, and the video continues. So that's one example of the kinds of interactive learning that will accompany our lessons. This is another example here. This is a exercise building on the objective I mentioned, introducing students to alternative points of view, which is absolutely a crucial part of our curriculum. So here's one point of view that students are asked to read. The title there is about the Declaration of Independence. They were hypocrites who did not care. But then it lays out that position. And then there's a second point of view titled They Did What They Could, right? So in a self-explanatory way, providing those two different points of view. And then students are asked to reflect on these points of view and to explain which point of view they agree with more. Importantly here, what is the weakest part of the argument supporting the point of view you agree with? So learning how to reflectively understand the opinions that hold. And which point of view do you agree with less? And what is the strongest part of the argument supporting that point of view? And so that just allows students to to understand opposing points of view, understand people who disagree with them, be able to dialogue and converse with people who disagree with them. As Daryl said, this lessens fear and increases knowledge because you are actually put in a position where you are confronted with an opinion you disagree with, a person who holds this opinion, and you can have the tools to talk through it with them, right? Instead of hiding behind safe spaces and your own ideology, you can talk through it with people you disagree with. So also as part of this lesson, another thing to highlight is the use of primary sources. That's something that I think is also really important in the range of sources that we include. So in this lesson on the Declaration of Independence, for example, we include Jefferson's draft of the Declaration of Independence, which it's a little known feature of Jefferson's draft that he included an entire paragraph condemning slavery in very vehement, harsh terms, and connecting his condemnation of slavery to the principles that he had enumerated earlier in the Declaration of Independence, the principles we all know and cherish: all men are created equal, endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights, etc. That Jefferson saw that connection, included a paragraph condemning slavery. That paragraph, of course, was removed by the Continental Congress prior to the adoption of the final version of the Declaration of Independence, and that just acknowledging and confronting that historical fact about this document provides a really fruitful window into dialoguing, conversing, thinking about, reflecting upon the relationship between our American founding ideals and the reality of the unjust practice of slavery. And so that's one unique aspect of this lesson in particular. We also include Prince Hall's petition to the Massachusetts legislature in 1777. And this is a petition by Prince Hall, a free African American living in Massachusetts, who argued in 1777, so right after the Declaration of Independence, that the principles in the Declaration dictated the abolition of slavery. And he made this eloquent, very well written, thought out petition to the Massachusetts legislature saying, look, here it is. Here's the reason why we should abolish slavery, and putting that forward. So that just shows the way in which, right from the beginning, from the time of the Declaration of Independence, we had both sides, I think, of this history. We had on the one hand the reality of the unjust practice of enslavement and the reality of racism, and then on the other hand, we had this universal, far-reaching aspiration of the Declaration of Independence to make progress and overcome that injustice and other injustices. So this is just an example, this lesson, of the kind of approach that we will be providing in the FAIR Pro-Human curriculum across K through 12, all grade bands, and dealing with a number of different topics in American history and in history and social studies, civics, and looking at the contributions of different peoples to the American story that we all share. So I also want to point you to the place on the website, the FAIR website, where you can request a copy of the FAIR Pro-Human Learning Standards. So I'm going to show you that here. So this is, you can get to this through the fairforall.org website. The resources tab has a link there to the Pro-Human Learning Standards, brief introduction to them there, and then you can request a copy of the Learning Standards. So I encourage you all to request a copy, to take a look at the Learning Standards we've developed, and to look forward to the full curriculum, which we're developing this summer and aim to have completed in August. So it's just a sneak peek of what we're developing here. So I'll stop. But yeah, I just want to thank Bayan, and thank my fellow panelists here. Thank you all for allowing me to celebrate Loving Day with you all, and for this very, very exciting work that FAIR is engaged in and you all are supporting. So thank you.
Thank you, Adam. Adam is actually on vacation with his family, so thank you for taking a break to share all this with us. So that concludes our events. I guess this part of the event. Whoever is able to, we would invite you to go to Hudson River Park, which is close to here. You can get t-shirts if you like, and we're planning to do a unity chain or a unity event, I guess I'll call it, at Hudson River Park. Take some photographs. We have some signs, some cards to hand out to anyone who's interested. But you know, we're not into protest marches. We're into unity marches. So so this is our first fair unity event. So thanks to everyone.
Final words. I will quote from de Tocqueville. De Tocqueville wrote, "The greatness of America lies not in being more enlightened than any other nation, but rather in her ability to repair her faults." End quote. I love that. It just means we have the tools of self-betterment and self-improvement embedded within our founding documents and within each one of us. Thank you.